The air was thick with humiliation. "Don't you ever talk back to me," Alfred hissed, his voice a sharp and threatening whisper. He was a white man, his tone laced with menace. "You are nothing here. Nothing. Clean this office now, or don't bother showing up tomorrow." "Sir, the floor is already clean. I've gone over it again and again," Maria, the janitor, replied calmly. But without hesitation, Alfred picked up a glass of water from a nearby desk and poured it directly over her head. The cold liquid streamed through her hair, ran down her face, and soaked her uniform, forming a small puddle on the very floor she had just polished. She gasped, shocked by the cold, but it wasn't the temperature that froze her. It was the absolute cruelty of the act. "There," Alfred sneered. "Now you have something to actually clean." He had no idea that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't just a janitor. She was a person with the power to destroy his entire career. Before we dive deep into this story, hit the like and subscribe button if you believe no one should ever be treated unjustly. Also, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. You'll definitely get a reply. The polished marble floors of the executive suite at Fuentes Innovations gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Maria Fuentes, disguised as a janitor, moved her mop in slow, deliberate strokes. The name tag clipped to her uniform read Janet, not Maria Fuentes. The same hands that once signed multi-million-dollar deals were now raw from the constant friction and harsh cleaning chemicals. Behind her, she heard the sharp, confident click of expensive leather shoes on the marble. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Alfred Hayes, the operations manager. A man who had never once acknowledged her in a boardroom meeting now stood behind her, a stack of reports clutched in his manicured hands. He had once looked up to her with respect. Now, his eyes burned with a restrained fury. She clenched her jaw, silently picking up the soaked papers from the floor, swallowing the urge to reveal her true identity. But that wasn't the plan. That wasn't why she was here. Maria Fuentes, a 28-year-old Harvard Business School graduate, had made a name for herself in the industry with her sharp intellect and innovative business strategies. She was renowned for her brilliance, earning her a spot on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. But Fuentes Innovations wasn't just a company. It was her father's legacy, a $5 billion fintech empire built from nothing by Roberto Fuentes 3.5 decades ago. Roberto had started the business in his garage with a $2,000 loan from his grandmother. As one of the few black CEOs in Silicon Valley at the time, he broke barriers and built his company on two core principles: innovation and integrity. His silver-streaked hair and the deep lines on his face were a testament to decades of relentless work. But recently, something had changed. A heart attack 6 months prior had changed everything. The doctors were clear. He had to slow down. The 80-hour work weeks that had been his life for years were no longer sustainable. Suddenly, the conversation about his succession was no longer theoretical. It was urgent. Maria had long been groomed for leadership. As Roberto's only child, she was the natural heir to the company. But something unsettled her father. Something he voiced one quiet evening over a family dinner, the city lights twinkling behind their modern home. "Maria, you know I'm proud of everything you've accomplished," Roberto began, his deep voice a mix of warmth and authority, the same voice that had inspired thousands of employees for years. "You have a brilliant mind for business. Your tech acumen is astonishing. But there's something you don't know." Maria set her fork down, raising a slight eyebrow. "What is it, Dad?" Roberto sighed heavily, the worry evident on his face. "You've never seen the company from the ground up. You don't know how our management truly treats the people who make this company run, the ones without fancy titles or corner offices." Maria opened her mouth to argue, but her father raised a hand. "When I started this company, I was everyone. The janitor, the accountant, the salesman, the engineer. I knew every corner of this business because I lived it. No report that crosses your desk can tell you what's really happening outside the executive floor. There are whispers, Maria. Rumors that the company culture is drifting away from the principles we were built on. But employees put on a show when they know the boss is watching. You can't lead something you don't fully understand." The silence between them was heavy. Maria Fuentes had never backed down from a challenge. She leaned forward slightly, her voice firm. "What are you suggesting, Dad?" The idea they hatched that night was audacious. For 2 weeks, Maria would go undercover as a janitor on the night shift. No benefits, no shortcuts, no special treatment. She would experience Fuentes Innovations as an ordinary employee, stripped of the power of her last name. Her transformation was profound. The expensive power suits were replaced with a simple, ill-fitting uniform. The fine jewelry was left behind for simple stud earrings. Her carefully styled hair was pulled back, returning to its natural curls. Her signature makeup was gone, and her contact lenses hid her sharp, intelligent gaze. The powerful executive vanished. In her place stood Janet, a quiet, invisible cleaner. For 2 weeks, Maria had to find out if her father's principles still lived within the company he built. She had no idea these 2 weeks would change not just her perspective on business, but her entire world. The next evening, Maria, now fully transformed into Janet, stood nervously in her baggy janitor's uniform, fiddling with the unfamiliar employee badge pinned to her chest. Her hands, once adorned with expensive rings and bracelets, were now bare and rough as she waited for her shift to begin. She adjusted her ill-fitting clothes and took a deep breath, preparing for whatever was to come. Her first night as a janitor began at 10 p.m., long after the company's top executives had gone home. The orientation was swift and impersonal, a cursory explanation of cleaning procedures, safety regulations, and a stern warning that any form of theft would lead to immediate termination and possible legal action. The supervisor barely glanced at her, simply handing her a set of keys and a checklist of tasks. Maria was used to being seen. As the daughter of Roberto Fuentes, a graduate and an executive vice president, she was accustomed to people meeting her gaze, to them straightening their posture when she entered a room. But as Janet, the janitor, she was invisible. Employees brushed past her as if she wasn't there. A few accidentally bumped her cleaning cart but didn't bother to apologize. When she entered offices where people were working late, they continued their conversations, sometimes openly discussing sensitive company matters as if she were deaf. By the end of her shift, her hands were sore and raw, and her once soft skin was beginning to callous. She learned to move with efficiency, conserving every motion to avoid wasting an ounce of energy. But more than the physical toll, the most profound discovery was the true face of Fuentes' innovations from the bottom. The perfect company her father had built, the one that prided itself on respect, integrity, and excellence, was not as flawless as she had believed. On her second night, the initial sting of muscle aches had settled into a constant, dull throb, but she was adapting. She learned to balance her weight while mopping to spare her back, and her palms were slowly toughening, calluses forming over the blisters. But no amount of physical preparation could have readied her for Alfred Hayes, the operations supervisor. Alfred Hayes, 45, was a man who had clawed his way up the corporate ladder. He maintained a pristine reputation with the executives, but under his command, many employees suffered. He was always impeccably dressed, with perfectly coiffed hair and a leather portfolio perpetually in hand. To the executive team, he was an ideal employee, hard-working, efficient, dedicated. But to those at the bottom of the company, especially the cleaning crew, he was a monster. "This is unacceptable," Alfred yelled during his first inspection. He wore a white glove, swiping it across the top of an air vent near the ceiling, an area not part of the nightly cleaning protocol. "Fuentes Innovation stands for excellence in all aspects. All of them," he repeated. With a wave of his hand, he ordered the entire east wing of the third floor to be re-cleaned, forcing the crew to stay 2 hours late without overtime pay. When Maria cautiously explained that the vents were on a quarterly deep cleaning schedule and not a daily task, Alfred cut her off. "I don't need excuses, I need results," he shouted. "It seems we're running out of people who know how to do their jobs around here." Alfred was difficult with everyone, but he was particularly hard on Maria. Maybe it was because she was new and hadn't yet learned to make herself disappear when he walked by. Or maybe it was because even hidden under the plain uniform, some small trace of her natural confidence remained. Whatever the reason, he made her his personal target. Even when her work was perfect, he found fault. He would use a flashlight to search for invisible streaks on glass partitions. He pointed out a single, tiny fiber of dust on a carpet she had vacuumed twice. He claimed to see a fingerprint on a stainless steel surface that gleamed under regular inspection. One night, as Maria was cleaning the executive restroom, Alfred appeared suddenly. Before she could even finish, he criticized everything. "Is your incompetence intentional? Or are you just naturally this bad at your job?" he asked sharply, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "This is why you people should be replaced by machines." At least the quality wouldn't drop. Maria gripped the mop handle, swallowing the rage that wanted to erupt from her. As an executive, she could end his career with a single email. But as Janet, the janitor, she could do nothing but lower her head, apologize, and promise to do better. Her colleagues noticed Alfred's torment. One evening, after another barrage of insults, a veteran janitor named Darnell pulled her aside. "Stay out of his way as much as you can," he whispered, his eyes darting around nervously, his expression heavy with experience. "I've seen him get a lot of good people fired with his impossible standards." But it was on a Thursday night that an incident revealed just how far Alfred was willing to go. Maria was cleaning the hallway on the executive floor. It was close to midnight, and the building was nearly empty. She carefully parked her cleaning cart against the wall while she refilled her bucket. She heard the familiar sound of expensive shoes on the marble floor. Alfred. He stopped beside her cart, eyeing her work with a dismissive sneer. Then, just as he walked away, his arm accidentally shoved the cart. It tipped over, crashing to the floor. Bottles of cleaning solution, rags, and supplies scattered everywhere. The floor she had spent hours perfecting was flooded with a chemical-smelling liquid. Alfred didn't react. He simply walked through the mess, leaving a trail of shoe prints in the puddle, and never looked back. Not a word, not a flicker of apology. To him, Maria wasn't even significant enough for a second glance. Maria stood frozen, staring at the mess at her feet. In that moment, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about being ignored or belittled anymore. This was worse. This was deliberate cruelty, an abuse of power from someone who knew he could get away with it. As she knelt to clean up the mess Alfred had made, fighting back tears of anger and profound humiliation, she realized her mission had changed. This was no longer about preparing herself to take over the company. This was now about taking a stand for the people who made Fuentes Innovations run people just like her father, back before he built his empire. As Alfred's discriminatory remarks became more blatant in the following days, Maria was ready. She documented every incident, dates, times, witnesses, and the exact words Alfred used. She studied which executives turned a blind eye and which seemed uncomfortable but did nothing. Piece by piece, she was building her case, all while continuing to play the part of Janet, the janitor no one saw. One evening, Alfred returned after his previous act. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he sneered sarcastically, stepping closer to Maria. She didn't reply, knowing any response would only escalate the situation. She quietly gathered her supplies, intending to move to the next office to avoid further confrontation. "I'm talking to you," Alfred said sharply. "When a supervisor speaks to you, the proper response is, 'Yes, sir,' or 'No, sir.' Or did they not teach you manners in whatever gutter you crawled out of?" "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir," Maria replied, forcing the words out, each one tasting like bile. He began walking across the floor she had just mopped, leaving dark shoe prints on her work. "This floor is still filthy," he declared, as if playing to an audience, though they were the only two there. "Can't you do a simple job right? Look at this, the dirt, these streaks." Maria looked at the floor. It had been perfect moments ago. The only dirt was from Alfred's own shoes. "I just cleaned it, sir," she said calmly, though a fire of rage was building inside her. It was dry and clean. "Are you contradicting me?" Alfred screamed. Then, he lowered his voice to a dangerous whisper. "You think you know more about the cleaning standards at Fuentes Innovations than I do? Let me show you where you really belong." Without hesitation, Alfred picked up a glass of water and poured it directly over her head. The cold liquid flooded her hair, streamed down her face, and soaked her uniform. She gasped, shocked by the cold, but it wasn't the temperature that stunned her. Music. Water dripped from her hair and uniform, forming small puddles at her feet. The humiliation was even worse than the anger. In that moment, she wasn't an executive. She wasn't a Harvard graduate. She wasn't even Janet the janitor. She was a person being treated as if she had no value by a man who believed he would never face any consequences. The water, mixed with tears on her face, not of weakness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. Slowly, she knelt and began to wipe at the water, her wet uniform clinging to her skin. But as she did, she made a silent promise. Alfred Hayes would face his reckoning, not just for what he did to Maria, but for the poison he had introduced into the company her father built. But Alfred wasn't the only problem. There was also Derek Phillips, the marketing director of Fuentes Innovations. At 40, Derek embodied the typical creative executive: expensive glasses, artfully tousled hair, and branded suits that looked stylish but not too corporate. Maria encountered Derek during her second week as Janet. His office was on her cleaning rotation, and what should have been a 20-minute job turned into a 3-hour ordeal, leaving her scrambling to catch up for the rest of her shift. When she entered Derek's office around 10 p.m., he was still hunched over his computer. Unlike other executives who ignore the janitors, he spoke immediately. "Ah, good, you're here," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "This office is a mess. It needs a deep clean." Maria looked around. It was clearly not a mess. There were a few coffee mugs on the desk, some neat stacks of paper, and a light layer of dust. Nothing required an intensive cleaning. Nevertheless, she nodded and got to work. As she cleaned, Derek watched her, covertly observing her movements. While she was wiping the glass on his desk, he suddenly stood up and came over. "You're doing that wrong," he said. "It should be circular motions, not straight lines." Maria sighed internally. Derek was one of those people who just liked to hear himself talk. He continued, his expertise growing with every word. He pointed out non-existent issues, posturing as a cleaning expert despite his marketing degree. As Maria listened, she realized another truth. Like Alfred, Derek had his own way of abusing power, and as before, Maria just listened not to obey, but to observe. Because, just like Alfred, Derek was now on her list of people who would face their karma. After she had cleaned every corner, vacuumed the carpet, and disinfected every surface, he picked up a paperweight and held it up to the light, as if expecting to find dust. "This won't do," he said, shaking his head with an air of profound disappointment. "There are still smudges on the window. There's lint on the carpet. And did you even dust the tops of the picture frames? You need to do it again, and do it right." Maria looked at the immaculate office, fighting to keep her frustration from showing. There was nothing wrong with anything Derek had mentioned, but as Janet the janitor, she had no authority to argue. She swallowed her pride, nodded, and quietly said, "Yes, sir," before starting the entire cleaning process from scratch. Derek went back to his desk, and for a fleeting moment, Maria saw a faint glint of satisfaction in his eyes before he returned to his work. But this time, Maria was even more meticulous. She wiped every surface with extra care, ensured the windows were spotless, and vacuumed the carpet with precision. She was prepared for another round of fault-finding, but after she finished, Derek simply repeated his old tactic with new complaints. "There's still dust on the baseboards," he claimed, though not a speck was visible to the naked eye. "And my desk isn't organized." Maria fought to hide her annoyance. The cleaning crew was strictly forbidden from touching an employee's personal papers or items. But Derek was deliberately making her feel incompetent and useless. "And what is that smell?" he added, feigning disgust. "Did you use the wrong cleaning solution? My office should smell clean and fresh, not like chemicals." This became Derek's system. He was never satisfied, and no matter how well the cleaning was done, he would invent a complaint. When he finally dismissed her with a careless, "That's better," it was the early hours of the morning, and she was far behind on her tasks. Maria realized this wasn't just happening to her. This was Derek's style. He made the cleaners redo their work just to assert his power. He deliberately made their jobs harder, accidentally knocking over a trash can to spill its contents, or scattering paper clips on a freshly cleaned floor, simply because he could. After the incident with Alfred, Maria decided to test the company's reporting process. If Fuentes Innovations truly valued dignity and respect as its corporate mission statement proclaimed, then human resources would surely act on such abuses. The most appropriate person to approach was Karen Mitchell, the HR director. Karen Mitchell, a woman in her mid-40s, projected an image of friendliness and accessibility. She wore business casual that was more casual than business. Her office door had a rainbow sticker and the sign that said, "Safe Space." Employee support posters featuring her picture and the slogan, "Talk to me, your voice matters," were plastered throughout the building. Her door seemed genuinely open to employees. So, Maria used her lunch break the next day to approach Karen and report what Alfred had done. Karen listened to her story, nodding with apparent concern as Maria spoke. But after the story was finished, Karen sighed and gently took Maria's hand, a gesture that seemed to promise understanding, but felt deeply patronizing. "First of all, thank you for bringing this to my attention," she began, her voice polished with corporate speak. "We take all employee concerns very seriously here at Fuentes Innovations. However, I think there might be a small misunderstanding of workplace dynamics here," she added, signaling that nothing would be done about Maria's complaint. The message was clear. "You are just a janitor, and you need to understand your place. You don't matter. The company doesn't care about your dignity." Maria nodded politely, though her insides were churning with fury. As she left, Karen offered one last piece of hollow advice. "Alfred just has very high standards for cleanliness," she said, her tone like a teacher giving a warning. "I know he can be blunt, but my advice is to just focus on your work instead of taking things so personally. In the corporate world, you need to have thick skin." As Maria walked out of the office, she glanced at the safe space sign on the door. The words were a lie, a hollow promise that meant nothing to the workers they deemed invisible. What Karen didn't know was that Maria had secretly recorded their entire conversation. That audio file would become evidence of how the company systematically ignored the complaints of its most vulnerable workers. If Alfred and Derek represented insidious abuses of power, it was Imelda Wells who revealed its most brazen form. At 45, Imelda was a pillar of Fuentes Innovations, the senior vice president of sales, a legend in the industry known for her aggressive negotiations and record-breaking sales figures. Her authority was never questioned. Their confrontation happened on a Friday night, during the third week of her undercover mission. As Maria was cleaning the main conference room on the 38th floor, she heard Imelda's sharp voice. "Excuse me, where do you think you're going?" Maria stopped. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This room is scheduled for cleaning at 9 p.m. I can come back later when you're finished." That should have been a sufficient answer, but Imelda Wells was not the type to follow normal protocol. "How dare you interrupt my meeting?" she yelled. "Do I really have to waste my time explaining basic professional courtesy to someone who cleans toilets for a living?" She was hit by the insult, and as usual, no one dared to intervene. At Fuentes Innovations, everyone remained silent. Maria had endured Alfred's abuse, Derek's petty retaliations, and countless other humiliations, but there was something different about Imelda's attack. Perhaps it was the sheer excessiveness of the situation being berated not for a mistake, but simply for following the correct schedule. Or perhaps it was the undisguised arrogance in Imelda's voice, her confidence that no one would ever dare to challenge her. For the first time, it wasn't Janet the janitor who spoke. It was Maria Fuentes herself. "With all due respect," she said, her voice soft but unshakable, "I am simply following the building's established protocol. If there was a scheduling conflict, the proper procedure is to inform facility management in advance. I am just doing my job, just as you are." The entire room went silent. The junior sales associates froze, their faces a mask of disbelief that a simple janitor had dared to talk back to Imelda Wells. Even Imelda herself blinked in surprise, as if she couldn't comprehend how someone so far beneath her had found the nerve to respond. But the surprise quickly passed. Imelda's face darkened, and in an instant, it was consumed with rage. The slap came without warning. It was as fast as lightning, and the sound of Imelda's palm connecting with Maria's cheek was sharp and ugly. Pain exploded across her face, radiating down her jaw. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her shoulder hitting her cleaning cart. "Don't you ever talk back to me," Imelda hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You are nothing here, nothing. Clean this room, or don't bother showing up tomorrow." The sting on Maria's cheek was intense, but it wasn't the physical pain that stunned her. It was the absolute, shameless audacity of the act. She had seen it all in the business world, from Harvard Business School to corporate boardrooms, but she had never imagined a professional setting where a woman could physically assault an employee, and no one would do anything. Not a single person moved. The junior sales associates suddenly became intensely interested in their laptops, their papers, anything to avoid Imelda's gaze. No one objected. No one intervened. Their silence was its own form of violence. It was acceptance. It was cowardly complicity. It was why people like Imelda thrived. In that instant, Maria wanted to reveal everything. One sentence, and Imelda's career would be over. But there was a deeper reason she remained silent. With an unexpected level of self-discipline, she lowered her gaze, swallowed the burning rage in her throat, let out a soft sigh, and wordlessly picked up her mop. This was the final straw, not because the slap hurt more than Alfred's abuse, not because Imelda's torment was worse than Derek's. It was because it proved her suspicions correct. Fuentes Innovations was broken. The company her father had built on a foundation of dignity and respect had become a place where a woman could strike an employee in front of multiple witnesses and nothing would happen. As she wiped down the tables, her mind sharpened with a singular purpose. This was no longer about understanding the company culture. It was no longer about preparing to lead. This was now about justice. From that night on, Maria's mission changed. She was no longer just observing. She was gathering evidence. By the end of her 2 weeks undercover, Maria had collected enough evidence to shatter all plausible deniability. She had seen the systemic abuse, experienced the humiliation and assault firsthand, and witnessed how those in power either covered it up or allowed it to happen. She knew it was time to act. Using her cleaning cart as the perfect cover, she concealed a tiny camera and a digital voice recorder between bottles of cleaning solution and rags. Her phone was used to silently take photos of documents left on desks late at night. She had a new mission. She continued her cleaning duties as before, but with every sweep of the mop, she was secretly accumulating conversations, images, and proof of the company's real culture. It wasn't long before she discovered an even deeper secret. Alfred, Derek, and Imelda weren't just abusive, they were thieves. They were secretly embezzling funds from the payroll of lower-level employees. There was evidence of corporate espionage. They were feeding sensitive information to competitors. All of this was a coordinated effort to force her father to step down before his succession plan could be implemented. On Friday night, the last night of her undercover mission, she was ready to reveal the truth. She finished her shift, made sure no one was following her, and walked away from the Fuentes Innovations building. She entered a public restroom. When she came out, Janet the janitor was gone. She had removed her headscarf, letting her natural hair, now perfectly styled, fall freely. She replaced her simple uniform with an elegant designer ensemble, put back on her signature glasses, and her face, makeup-free for 2 weeks, once again had the subtle but powerful look of an executive. Maria Fuentes was back. She got into a car and gave the driver a familiar address, her father's home in Hillcrest. At the sprawling modernist mansion, Roberto Fuentes was waiting. Seated in his home office, his expression serious. He knew something had changed. Maria took a deep breath. It was time to tell him everything, and when she was finished, the downfall of all the guilty parties would begin. "You look exhausted," Roberto Fuentes observed, a quiet concern in his voice as he studied his daughter's face, not as a CEO, but as a father. "I am," Maria admitted with a deep sigh. "But it's not just a physical exhaustion. What I found, it's not just tiring, Dad. It's soul-crushing." For 3 hours, she laid out the evidence, one piece at a time. With her laptop, she showed emails and performance evaluations that revealed patterns of discrimination, financial records with clear evidence of corruption, and videos that showed blatant employee abuse. As Roberto watched the footage of Imelda slapping Janet, his fists clenched. When he saw Alfred shamelessly pour water over an employee, his jaw tightened in fury. "They have betrayed everything this company stands for," he said, his voice low, but filled with tension. "Everything I worked for, everything I believed in." Maria nodded. She knew this wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about the principles her father had built his life on, and how they had been desecrated. "The real question," she said, "is how we fix this in a way that brings real, lasting change." Together, Maria and Roberto formulated a strategy. Monday morning, Roberto would call an emergency board meeting. The reason, a critical internal matter. Who needed to attend? All the key executives involved. Alfred, Karen, Derek, and Imelda. What would the board know? A general idea of the problem, but not the full extent of the evidence. Only when the time was right would they learn the whole truth. To maintain the illusion, Maria would go undercover as Janet one last time. She knew she would have to endure one final wave of humiliation, but it would be worth it for the justice that awaited. As they laid out their plan, their conversation stretched late into the night. Before she left, Roberto hugged her tightly, more than their usual father-daughter embrace. "I thought you would learn about leadership from this experience," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "But now, you're the one teaching me. Whatever happens on Monday, know that I am proud of you, not just as my daughter, but as the future of Fuentes Innovations. By Sunday night, all the pieces were in place. The board had been notified, the evidence was prepared, security had been briefed to ensure a safe and orderly handling of any fallout. All that remained was the final act. The sun rose bright and clear over the Fuentes Innovations Tower, its glass facade glittering in the morning light. It was the most important day in the company's history. Maria put on her janitor's uniform one last time. This was her final shift as Janet. As the employees arrived, none of them had any idea what storm was about to break. Maria, with her cleaning cart, made her way to the 42nd floor of the executive boardroom. This is where it would all go down. The boardroom was a vast space with a long, polished walnut table surrounded by expensive leather chairs. She began cleaning the room, methodically wiping down every surface. Suddenly, Alfred burst in. "What are you doing in here?" he yelled, holding a briefcase in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. "I was assigned to clean this room, sir," Maria replied, using the polite, submissive tone she had perfected. "It had better be perfect. If I find a single speck of dust, you're fired," Alfred warned, his voice laced with threat. "Yes, sir," Maria replied, even though she knew she had already cleaned it flawlessly for hours. The executives and board members began to arrive, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and anxiety about the sudden meeting. Roberto was the last to enter, and as he did, his eyes met Maria's for a brief moment, a silent glance, a secret exchange of understanding. Alfred returned for his inspection. He ran his finger along a windowsill, pretending to find dirt. He looked up at the ceiling, feigning the discovery of a cobweb. "There are still streaks on the window," he announced, though it gleamed in the light. "And you didn't even straighten the chairs properly. You're useless." Maria knew Alfred was just putting on a show to humiliate her in front of the executives, but his power was about to end. With a gesture, Roberto silenced the room. He sat at the head of the table, his voice steady as he spoke. "I have called this emergency meeting to address a grave issue within our company culture," he began, his tone firm and direct. "Over the past month, I have gathered disturbing evidence that shows we have strayed far from the principles this company was built on." A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. The executives began to exchange nervous glances. Karen from HR straightened her posture, ready to feign concern. Derek, once arrogant, now looked nervous, tapping his fingers on the table. A man named Marcus was visibly sweating, repeatedly adjusting his tie. Imelda remained impassive, but the game had changed. Judgment Day had arrived. "Get out!" Alfred suddenly yelled at Maria, his voice sharp with irritation. "This is a confidential company matter." The moment had come, the culmination of 2 weeks of endurance, meticulous documentation, and patient waiting. Every eye in the room turned to the silent janitor in her gray uniform, expecting her to obey, to scurry out as a low-level employee should. But Maria didn't move. Instead, she calmly leaned her mop against the wall, straightened her posture, and faced the executives with a quiet but unshakable authority. She looked directly at Alfred, and in a voice filled with confidence, no longer the meek tone of Janet the janitor, but the firm voice of a leader, she spoke. "Actually, Alfred, I think it's best that I stay. You, on the other hand, seem to be the one who doesn't understand what's really happening here." In slow, deliberate movements, she untied her headscarf, letting her natural curls fall around her face. She took off the plain glasses that were part of her disguise and put on her designer frames from her pocket. And in the final, dramatic act of her planned rebellion, she unzipped her gray uniform, revealing a sharp blazer and blouse underneath, impeccably tailored. The transformation was stunning. Recognition slowly dawned on their faces. They had worked with Maria Fuentes. They had attended meetings with her. They reported to her. But they had never seen Janet, because to them, janitors were not real people, just shadows passing by. "I am Maria Fuentes," she announced, though it no longer needed to be said. "And as my father's successor, I am the new CEO of Fuentes Innovations." The room was stunned into silence. The executives were frozen, their expression shifting from disbelief to pure terror. Maria took a small remote from her pocket. With a single click, the evidence she had spent weeks gathering appeared on the large screen behind her. "Here's my report," she said. "A toxic culture that goes against everything this company claims to stand for." The first video played. Alfred Hayes, clearly visible, pouring a glass of water over Janet. The timestamp and camera angle left no room for denial. Alfred went pale, seeing his cruelty displayed for all to see. "No, that's out of context," he stammered, trying to defend himself. "She was being insubordinate." "And pouring water on an employee is a form of assault," Maria replied, her voice remaining calm. "There is no context that justifies that." Next came a stream of evidence. Derek Phillips, repeatedly making her re-clean the same desk, searching for non-existent flaws, a clear display of his power trip. Derek could do nothing but hold his tongue, any attempt at a lie crushed. Then, it was Imelda Wells's turn. "This is ridiculous," she snarled. "This footage is clearly doctored." But before she could finish, Maria switched to the next slide, a different camera angle of the same incident, showing the exact moment Imelda slapped Janet. "Would you like me to play the audio, Miss Wells?" Maria asked coldly. "Your exact words were, 'Don't you ever talk back to me. You are nothing here. Nothing.'" Imelda's face fell. There was no escaping the truth. As Maria presented her evidence, piece by piece, the former confidence of the culprits was replaced by pure fear and desperation. Some board members were furiously scribbling notes, others sat rigid and silent. One of the oldest members took off his glasses, wiped them, and shook his head in disgust. "I thought you were just a janitor," Alfred yelled in desperation. "Maria, please, don't fire me." Before Maria could respond, the boardroom doors opened. 2 security officers entered. "Mr. Hayes," one said, "we've been instructed to escort you from the premises after this meeting." "This can't be happening. You can't just throw me out." "This isn't about small mistakes," Roberto answered, standing for the first time. "This is a complete betrayal of the principles this company was built on. My daughter conducted this investigation as part of her leadership training, but we never anticipated the extent of the corruption, abuse, and discrimination she would uncover." Roberto turned to the board and in a firm voice declared, "I built this company on integrity, innovation, and respect for all employees. Somehow, we lost our way. Starting today, that changes." Within an hour, the board had made its decision. Alfred Hayes, Karen Mitchell, Derek Phillips, and Imelda Wells were immediately terminated for gross misconduct. Security confiscated their company-issued devices and revoked their access to the building. As Alfred was being led out, he approached Roberto one last time, desperate. 30 years, Roberto. I gave 30 years of my life to this company. You can't just throw me away." Roberto's reply was firm. "You're right, Alfred. 30 years is a long time, which makes it all the more disappointing that you used that power to tear others down instead of lifting them up." There were no more words left. As Alfred walked the long hallway out, the sound of his footsteps was the only noise in the silent boardroom. Under the leadership of Maria Fuentes, a new chapter was about to begin. As security led Alfred away, Maria felt a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a profound understanding of the work that lay ahead to rebuild the company from the ashes of corruption. The meeting continued, focusing on immediate steps to repair the damage and rebuild a proper company culture. After the discussion, the board members approached Maria one by one. Some congratulated her on the brilliance of her investigation. Others, clearly affected, expressed remorse for their oversight. Through it all, she remained calm and composed, carrying the same strategic and thoughtful mindset that had fortified her through 2 weeks of abuse. These were the qualities that would guide her as CEO. When finally, only she and her father remained in the room, Roberto came over and hugged her tightly, his pride unconcealed. "What you did today was extraordinary," he said softly. "You didn't just expose corruption, you lived what needed to be changed. I couldn't have done what you did. My pride would have never allowed me to endure what you went through." Maria hadn't expected to get emotional, but in that moment, she felt the weight of everything she had learned. This wasn't just about abuse, it was about the true meaning of leadership. Roberto nodded slightly, a look of care in his eyes. "The board wants to fast-track your appointment as CEO. After today, they are convinced you are ready." Maria glanced for a moment at the sweeping windows overlooking the city. She knew it wouldn't be an easy road, but she was prepared. "I'm ready," she replied. "But not because I'm your daughter or because I have fancy diplomas. I'm ready because I've seen this company from the bottom up. I know what works, and I know what desperately needs to be changed." She looked at the gray uniform she had left on a chair. She didn't throw it away. Instead, She carefully folded it, a quiet tribute to the lessons it had taught her. "I learned more in this uniform than I ever did at Harvard," she said, "and I will never forget those lessons, even when I'm sitting at the head of this table." As they were leaving the boardroom, she paused beside the cleaning cart. "There's one more thing I need to do before this is official. Change doesn't happen in an instant. Rebuilding a broken culture takes time, effort, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths." The next few months were not easy. There was resistance. Some clung to the old system. Obstacles she hadn't anticipated arose. But 6 months later, the change at Fuentes Innovations was undeniable. The results were clear: higher employee satisfaction, increased productivity, and a lower turnover rate, especially among the previously undervalued employees. It wasn't just policies that had changed, it was the culture itself. For Maria, the transformation was not just professional, it was personal. The physical hardship of cleaning had strengthened her body. The emotional weight of being ignored and belittled had deepened her understanding of workplace power dynamics, and all of it showed in her leadership style. In executive meetings, she ensured all voices had a space, not just the loudest. When visiting different departments, she greeted the maintenance staff by name, with the same respect she gave to senior executives. In every decision she made, she always asked, "How will this affect everyone, not just those in the boardroom?" 3 months after that historic boardroom meeting, Roberto Fuentes formally announced his retirement, passing the torch to Maria. Under her leadership, Fuentes Innovations didn't just grow, it became a model of integrity, innovation, and respect. And there, Maria returned to the beginning of her journey, from an invisible employee to a CEO who truly understood the value of every worker. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and hit the subscribe button. See you in the next story.